welcome to our roundtable discussion on being and finding a trauma-informed practitioner. It's really great to see faces that I know and new faces, new names. So thanks everyone for, I guess, just like saying yes and being willing to be here with us on this journey. So one thing that I like to say when I am instructing or guiding things is that everything is an invitation. And so please consider that like this, if it's just a suggestion, it's an invitation. However you come, however you show up is perfect. So if you need to put your video camera off for the rest of the day and like make your kids dinner, you know, I don't think we really know where the other person is at, like how are we showing up today? And I think for me, it's a privilege to be able to show up in an office without my children climbing on me. I think it's a privilege to be able to sit up for more than an hour for some people. So just to kind of name that, whatever you need to do, please feel free to do it. We are happy to have you here. Next on my list is, I would love to actually, I'm gonna jump one item. Wanted to do just some housekeeping. If y'all could just stay on mute for the, you know, unless you're speaking. So if we could just take a moment to check to see if you're on mute. And fantastic, thank you. And if you are wanting to participate, that's great. I can't see the whole screen. So if you're like if you know how to use the raise hand feature, does anyone not know how to use the raise hand feature to ask a question? Laura? Okay, Laura, I can see you. So just raise your hand if you have a question, okay? Okay, wait, Alice, can you see Laura?
Yeah, I can see everyone. So if there's someone with their hands raised, their actual hand, I'll see it.
Great, thank you, Alice. Oh, I am a speed talker. So if I start to speed talk, please feel free to let me know that I'm speed talking. I will also try to make a conscious effort to not speed talk. So Alice is, she's going to be helping support Zoom. She's also going to be helping to support the conversation, both energetically and practically. If you need anything, please feel free to private or direct message Alice, and she can try to offer support. Alice, do you want to say more about that role?
Sure. I am here to help if you have any concerns or come up around the technology. If you're feeling like you need to say something and you're not getting noticed or anything like that, let me know. I'm going to just keep my eye on sort of how people are doing in this space. And if it seems like anything is needed, I'll be here.
Thanks, Alice. I appreciate it. One thing that I really like to welcome all of us to do, even the panelists, is this concept of step up, step back. If you find that, because there's going to be room for discussion and open-ended questions, but if you find that you're kind of like wanting to jump in and you have a lot to say, that's great. And I would encourage that if you're finding like, I'm the first to talk, I'm always, you know, like I'm talking, try to just gently step out of your comfort zone and like step back a little bit. And if you're finding that you're holding back and that there might be some things that you are wanting to say, try to just push yourself just gently a little bit, maybe outside of that comfort zone. I am definitely one who has to remind myself to step back. And I remember in my, I was in college and I was in this, it was like a discussion-based class, and my professor actually asked me to stop talking so much, and I agreed. And I was so glad that I did, because what I found was that the people who aren't the first to speak actually have like these really beautifully, miraculously different, wonderful, lovely things to say. And they're totally different than what I would have observed, because I'm the one who has to remind myself to step back a little bit. And just trying to encourage us to lean into that. And also, if someone says something that doesn't feel right, please feel free to like name, chat, and say something like, ouch, that hurts. And then it gives us the opportunity to say something really simple like, oops, my bad. You know, like I made a mistake, and we'll take it from there. Does that feel okay for everyone? Yeah, okay. So that takes us to a brief land acknowledgement. Alice, would you be willing to lead that?
Sure. Respectfully acknowledge that this event is hosted on the traditional territory of the Massachusetts people. And also I am speaking from the unceded land of the people of the Wabanaki Confederacy. We offer our gratitude and respect to those that tended these lands for many generations and those that still live here today.
Thanks, Alice. Okay. All right. That is leading us to our first embodiment practice. So throughout the panel, throughout the discussion, throughout the roundtable, we're going to be inviting y'all into doing some embodiment practices. One of the biggest challenges with trauma is this rupture, right? Like we rupture out of ourselves, parts of ourselves rupture away from ourselves. And a really big challenge is learning how to come back into our body. And so that's one thing that I have really appreciated about the recovery process is this concept of embodiment. And so Carla, would you be willing to do the heart breath thing for all of us if you choose to join in?
Sure, absolutely. Emmy. Do you want people to do introductions first, or do you want to just jump straight into the practices?
I'd say jump straight into the practices and then go into introductions, because I think it's good to like get into our bodies.
Okay, perfect. So I know it's Tuesday, but it kind of feels like it's been a long week already. I don't know who else feels that way, but I certainly do. So I'd like to get us all centered and, as Emmy said, get embodied and get into our bodies and really kind of get out of that monkey brain state. And even though this might sound counterintuitive, I'd like all of you to close your eyes for just a moment and just notice the busyness of your mind. Just noticing any thoughts, any distractions, any to-do lists. I know I have several of those going at any given point in time. And notice whether you're noticing it in your mind, whether you're noticing it somewhere in your body, perhaps noticing any tightness in your body as you're noticing that. And then whenever you're ready, just noticing that little quiet voice that thankfully only you can hear in your mind. And whenever you're ready, you're going to start saying the following to yourself. I'm bringing my breathing down to my heart. And you're just going to keep repeating that a few times. I'm bringing my breathing down to my heart. And if it's helpful, you might even imagine inhaling through your heart and exhaling out of your heart. If you'd like to imagine the inhale being a certain color, you could do that. And perhaps the exhale is the same color or a different color. And again, just noticing that voice, that sound in your mind, and bringing my breathing down into my heart. Perhaps you're beginning to notice your jaw beginning to soften and to relax, perhaps noticing your eyes and your eyelids beginning to feel looser, heavier. Some people might notice it to be beneficial to slightly separate their teeth, or even to place the tip of your tongue up on the top of the roof of your mouth as you bring your breathing all the way down to your heart. And really creating a safe space, an inclusive space, an open space for sharing, an open space for learning. And sometimes learning as we share. And then whenever you're ready, as you notice your shoulders just sinking into the frame of your body, just sending a wave of relaxation all the way down to the tips of your toes, maybe down to your fingertips. If there's any particular part of your body that's been holding tension, you can notice that you can send this wave of comfort and openness and relaxation to that particular part. And as you notice this part beginning to feel more loose, beginning to feel more relaxed, perhaps, whenever you're ready, taking a nice, deep, refreshing breath. And just bringing yourself all the way back to the present moment. And opening your eyes whenever you feel ready.
Thank you, Carla.
Pleasure.
How's everyone feeling after that? Yay. Thanks, Carla. That was lovely. And I love that practice. Okay. So the last thing on my list for this section is I need to apologize. Anti-racism has been a huge part of my trauma-informed practices, and there are no people of color on the panel, and that was my bad. That's totally my fault, and I just want to honor and acknowledge that I made a mistake, and in the future, as we do these panels, I will do better to have more representation on the panel. So thank you for hearing me out with that one. And moving forward, I'm going to introduce myself. My name is Emmy Mathis, and I am a Reiki Master Trainer. I am a certified hypnotist recently with Carla's class. And I don't know, I have a lot of other certifications. I'm an embodiment coach, and I do a lot of energy work and embodiment practices. And I wanted to say that I am also... I am a survivor of childhood medical abuse. There was a distinct amount of neglect in my home, and I am a survivor of sexual assault and domestic violence. My children and I are survivors of domestic violence. All of this led to developing some pretty severe chronic fatigue and PTSD in me. And in order to heal and work with those, because those are really difficult things to have as a single parent, I have sole custody of my children. I had no other choice. Like Western medicine doesn't have a lot of options for PTSD or chronic fatigue. And so I leaned into trauma-informed practices, and I leaned into energy medicine, and I have slowly been healing over the past few years, which is really exciting. And that is my introduction. And I'm gonna call people in order that I see them for the people who are on the panel. Alice, I have you first. Do you feel okay to come off mute and introduce yourself?
Can I go at the end? Thanks.
Definitely. Thank you for naming that. Carla, can you go next?
Sure. So my name is Carla Shala. I am the owner of Everybody in Mind Wellness Center, which is actually one of my quote unquote newer babies. I have been a certified clinical hypnotherapist for going on 14 years. My original private practice was hemisphere hypnotherapy. And similar to many trauma-informed practitioners, I had some pretty significant trauma as a teenager, and exhausted a lot of talk therapy, which didn't really what I like to refer to as verbal diarrhea. And wasn't particularly helpful to me. And without, going into a long story, essentially came across hypnosis. And within 2 weeks of my hypnosis training, which actually the part that I left out was at the time I was a clinical psychology grad student, and decided to drop out of grad school and to go and study hypnosis instead. And within 2 weeks of my training, I did more healing than I had in probably 6 or 7 years of talk therapy. And I was hooked, and it was official. I was not going back to complete my clinical psych, although there's a small part of me that wishes that I would have done that, because it would have been kind of nice to have that certificate hanging on my wall, more from an ego standpoint. But I absolutely love what I do. I'm a certified instructor with 3 different organizations, Emmy and Erica Lee and Danny and Agnes, and I'm trying to see if there's anybody else that I'm missing out. They're all former students of mine, so I feel super excited to see so many of you here this evening. And I just really appreciate Emmy actually for having the wonderful idea to host this roundtable. It's all Emmy, so thank you, Emmy.
Thanks, Carla. Next on my screen, I have Erica. Erica, do you feel okay to go next?
Absolutely. Thank you, Emmy. I'm quite honored to be here. My name is Erica. I am an international medium. I've been publicly practicing since 1999, and also a theta healer and a clinical hypnotherapist, thanks to Carla, and training with Emmy and Agnes recently. And I'm very fascinated by consciousness, which is one of the reasons I wanted to pursue hypnotherapy after becoming a medium. So I do have a trauma history myself. I have a lot of trauma. I would say the vast majority of traumatic events happened from zero, between 0 and 20. So, the first 2 decades of life. And so I've really embarked on a healing journey starting as a teenager. And a lot of the trauma occurred in the home. I have medical trauma, which I know Emmy also mentioned, a lot of severe neglect and abuse at home, and sexual assaults as well. So I have been on this journey of healing, and a lot of research suggests, so I've participated in a lot of university research here in the US and in the UK, researching mediums and like high-performing, high-volume intuitives and psychics and mediums. And one thing that is pretty interesting is that there's I want to say not a mutually inclusive correlation, but a strong correlation between people that have well-developed, I guess I'll say, intuitive and psychic gifts and trauma. So it's sort of, I guess, can be referred to the phrase of a gift of trauma, which is an interesting phrase. I don't like to focus on that phrase too much because I don't want to, glorify or glamorize the traumatic experience, but I do feel like the healing is very powerful, and the healing that I've received in my life from my practices and what I've learned on that journey and in my training, as I know Carla had mentioned, those have really transformed my life so much that I really felt called to share them with the world. So that's how I'm here, and I'm honored to be part of it. So thank you, Emmy and Carla, for including me.
Thanks, Erica. Thank you. Next on my screen, I have Christy Joy. Do you feel okay to go next?
Sure. Hi, everybody. My name is Christy Joy. I am in Goshen, Connecticut, and I am a healing touch practitioner and instructor, and I teach a course called Healing Through the Vagus Nerve, which is where I met Emmy, and some other classes for children and families, kind of focused around having healthy, resilient nervous systems. And trauma is a big part of that. It has a huge effect on how our nervous system functions. I've also survived several traumas and periods of trauma throughout my life, starting in childhood. And most recently, I am a very stressful, like I would call it chronic stress trauma with my ex-husband, ended in January. So I'm still recovering from that and using all of my tools, but it's been really interesting because my learning about the nervous system kind of just preceded this period of intense stress. So I could see what was happening to me as I was going through it and the effect that it was having on my nervous system. And luckily I have the resources, practitioners, and practices to help me get back on track. But it definitely helps us be more empathetic, doesn't it, when we have these experiences ourselves and know what our clients are going through. So I appreciate you putting this together, Emmy, and inviting me.
Thank you, Christy Joy. Next, I have Jonah. Jonah, are you cool to go?
Hi, I'm Jonah Emerson Bell. I'm here from Santa Fe, New Mexico. I feel really honored to get to be here with all you people who seem like really interesting and really smart. My imposter syndrome is kicking in a little bit, but that's all good. What do I do? I'm a tarot reader and astrologer. I also have a hypnosis certification, not through Carla, but through somebody else. Yeah, I'm in graduate school right now to become a mental health counselor. So maybe going the legit route after, beginning in the fringes. But I appreciate being able to sort of like weave in everything that I've learned in my journey. And also maybe like bring the mainstream a little bit more towards the fringe where I'm a lot more comfortable practicing. And I'm also in recovery from alcoholism and opiate addiction. And being a drug addict for many, many years, definitely experienced a lot of like uncomfortable, weird, and difficult shit. So I don't know. And that's, that sort of life is what brought me here. And particularly because as I was coming into recovery, a lot of my friends did not have the same good fortune that I had. A lot of them passed away from the opioid epidemic. And a lot of them have had a lot of difficulty coming into a recovery program or finding practitioners who can like understand them, see them, treat them with dignity and respect. And that's one of the things that, has become really important to me, is being able to like, provide support for people who may not feel seen or, respected by other professional practitioners. So anyway, I'm really glad to be here.
Thanks, Jonah. And I don't know if this helped your imposter syndrome or makes me sound like wicked arrogant, but I don't really let other people work on me. And Jonah is a practitioner on me. So I don't know. I'm just putting that out there. Okay, thank you. Alice, does it feel okay to go now?
Sure, yeah. My name is Alice Toohey, and I am currently a death doula, and I have done a lot of other things in my life as well. But the work that I am most wanting to do at this point in my life is around death and dying. Definitely. I think the way that I lately have been thinking about my childhood is that like I absorbed much more than I could handle on my own and had nobody to process with at all. And so essentially, I developed tools based on that, what would work for a child who was constantly overwhelmed. And I've been learning a lot more about that lately, and for my own life, understanding sort of the physicality of what that is like. And I was interested in having this discussion, and Emmy is somebody that I know and speak with regularly and feel like often brings a trauma-informed perspective. So I'm really, really grateful for this conversation. Yeah, thanks. Thanks,
Alice. I also thank you. Thanks everyone for being here. If it's okay, I was just going to name the names that I see on my screen. I have 2 iPhones, so if you are on his iPhone, if you want to unmute yourself and say your name or drop it in the chat, I'd be honored to say it. But I see Daniela Nunez, I see Laura Kartheiser. I see Lisa. I see iPhone. I see Mary Harris, Agnes. I can't pronounce her name. I see another iPhone, and I see Rowan. Thanks, Rowan, for coming on here. I just thank you all for being here. I'm going back to my notes. All right. All right. So next on my agenda, I have the concept of like, why are we here? And I remember, I think I had this, I had like a spiritual awakening when I read this. It was a sentence in the intro. It was an intro to a book, and it was Peter Levine's Waking the Tiger. Peter Levine is one of the early somatic like practitioners. He observed animals, and like there was this question of why aren't animals in the wild traumatized? And so he just started watching them, and he found that they do things with their bodies. And then so he started to teach himself how to do it and other people how to do it. And in one of the early books that he wrote, he's just this quote. Well, it was one sentence, but it sounds prettier and with a few more sentences. So I'm just gonna read it. And then maybe I'll paste it into the chat too, because sometimes my brain goes blank when people talk. So I'm going to paste it into the chat so you can read it with me. And I will also read it. So trauma is a fact of life. It does not, however, have to be a life sentence. Not only can trauma be healed, but with appropriate guidance and support, it can be transformative. Trauma has the potential to be one of the most significant forces for psychological, social, and spiritual awakening and evolution. And this is a sentence that changed my life. How we handle trauma as individuals, communities, and societies greatly influences the quality of our lives. It ultimately affects how or even whether we will survive as a species. Okay, so I am wondering if Christy, would you be willing to do the cotton ball thing?
Yes.
Do you not have the jar or the cotton balls?
So I'm assuming the context is kind of how trauma affects
Or
this.
maybe, like you could introduce it too.
Okay, so yeah, this is from our Healing Through the Vagus Nerve course, and it's just this visual of how each of us has a different capacity for life and the different things that affect that and can affect that. So, I know for myself, when I've been going through, these very stressful periods, my capacity ends up being so non-existent that I can't do the things that I will sometimes judge myself for not being able to do. And I think that as practitioners and as people, it's really important to keep that in mind, because everybody that comes to us is going to have a different capacity, even for the clicking of keys on a keyboard, right? Like that can send somebody's nervous system over the edge. And my daughter has misophonia, so we deal with that on a regular basis. For those that don't know what that is, it's a very rageful reaction to certain sounds, like chewing. But anyway, so if you can visualize, somebody with the small capacity, which this can happen from not getting enough sleep, not having a good diet. It can happen from trauma. It can happen from stress. It can happen from being overwhelmed with too much to do or relationships or any number of things. But you have this many things coming at you, right? And it's overflowing. So we kind of have two choices, and we can do both, and it's best to do both. So one thing we can do, of course, is just take some of the balls out, right? So that's things like taking things off your plate. If there's unhealthy relationships, maybe doing something about those. Reducing the number of hours you work if you can, things like that. Healing trauma, will take some of these balls out and take the pressure off our system. And then the other option is to increase our capacity, so create a bigger jar. So some of the things that we do, will also, in addition to taking some of these balls out, like the trauma healing, will also increase our capacity. So a lot of our practices that we teach in our course are kind of focused on that. And then, as you can see, then we have lots of room for whatever comes, to us in life. So that's the abbreviated version.
Thank you, Christy Joy.
Mm-hmm.
I appreciate that. Does anyone have any questions? That for me, that feels pretty straightforward, but does anyone have any questions? Okay, I love that demo. So thank you for being willing to do it. So kind of like sticking with this theme of like, why are we here? I think it really kind of still comes into this idea of like, what is trauma? And so when I think of trauma, I think of some really basic concepts. One of them is often referred to as the triune brain, the window of tolerance, and then it's all kind of like wrapped around in the automatic nervous system with our vagus nerve. I've also heard of this idea that trauma is like too much, too soon, too fast, or things that there's a rupture without any repair. And I'm wondering if any of the practitioners if you have any any ideas or phrases that you think of when you hear of the word trauma, if you feel like sharing them.
Yeah, I can't remember if this was Peter Levine, but it's something to the effect of trauma is what happens to us in the absence of an empathetic witness. So part of trauma is not being believed, not having somebody there that is supporting you, feeling helpless.
Yeah, thank you, Christy Joy. I appreciate that. Thank you. Carla?
I would say, perception is reality, which is something that I always share with my clients and with my students. And to me, that kind of speaks to the core of how people experience trauma. So something that might not necessarily be traumatic for me based on my capacity, to reference Christy Joy's beautiful, analogy. Might be quite traumatic to somebody else. And I think holding space for how other people perceive trauma is really important as well. So just wanted to share that.
I appreciate that, Carla. Thank you. Does anyone else want to?
Yeah, I've heard that trauma is not the event, but it's the way that we process the event, right? So anything, right, like you said, too much, too soon, too fast, right? That we experience and then get stuck in that, and then are continuing to experience it, trying to find a way out, right? It's interesting for me to think about that, right? It's like, how do we get out of like the time loop that we get stuck in, right?
Yeah. 1 second, Alice. That also reminds me to remember in the idea that it's in our bodies, it's in our nervous system, that it is a physiological response. I just wanted to name that. Alice, go ahead.
That's what I was going to say too. I was going to bring up the body. Yeah.
Do you want to say more?
Well, just the fact that it lives, I guess I was thinking like it's something that happens and then it continues to live in my body and is easily triggered, because it's kind of hanging out there.
Yeah. And sorry, 1 second. I see your hand, Erica. And I think also I think in the West, we really think that our brain isn't our body, you know, and so I'm realizing that I'm having this conversation that my, you know, it's not in my brain, but it is, I mean, my brain is a part of my body, right? But that it is a bodily response. And I just felt like that needed to be said. And I really appreciate what you said, Alice. Thank you. Erica.
Only building on what Emmy and Alice had shared about the physiological response, Gabor Mate is someone that, you know, I really have a great appreciation for because he's done a lot of, you know, research and writing about, you know, physical manifestations of a traumatic history or traumatic events. And what I found very interesting in my journey with his work is building on Emmy and Alice mentioning about the physiological responses that you may, like, even if you're not aware that you're having a physiological response, you still can be. So you may be having a stress response physiologically to an event, but not registering it in a cognitive way. So that was pretty interesting for me because it allowed me to, you know, think of embodiment in a different capacity, you know, and notice that there's times when maybe I don't feel like I'm having an emotional response per se in that aspect of like a sensory experience, but that we can be stressed about things and not even acknowledge that we're stressed about them. So again, like how like the physiological response is significant, and then how we can have adapted to trauma so much that we sublimate that to the point that we're not even aware of it. So I found that really interesting about the physiological aspect.
Yeah, thanks, Alice. I appreciate that. Or sorry, Erica. I'm getting people's names wrong again, Carla. Thank you, Erica. I really appreciate that. It reminded me of, like, there'll be times when I'll feel calm on the inside, but my kids will do something and I'll just like yell at them. And I'm like, I feel fine, you know, but I'm yelling, you know, so it's this like separation of how I'm thinking versus how I'm behaving and like what's happening in my body. I feel like it's important to understand a little bit about the nervous system and the brain in order to kind of like see what's going on and to see what parts are getting triggered during this time. And so I had a few concepts that I think I already named that I'm going to name again, and that's the triune brain, the window of tolerance, and the vagus nerve. And I'm happy to unpack the triune brain, but does anyone else on the panel want to talk about it? No, okay, that's fine. I'm lucky. I'm just gonna share my screen. Okay, so scrolling down a little bit. So there's this like basic concept that, so like some medical practitioners are like, oh, this isn't accurate. But what they end up saying is like it's overly simplified. So this is a very overly simplified idea or understanding of the way our brain works. And so at the core, it's right here. It's like the top of our, well, whatever, it doesn't matter what it is. It's a brainstem, sorry. It's often referred to as like our lizard brain. This was the part of our brain that developed first, is the oldest part of our brain. And it is based on, it's just based on survival. So this is where our breathing comes from. This is where our desire to eat and drink water comes from. This is where like our sex drive comes from. And this is like a very, very basic, like, am I safe, am I not safe type of space. And it is attached to other basic reactions in the rest of our body. And then we come into this space, which is our limbic brain. It's also often referred as like our mammal brain. It kind of like wraps around our brainstem, and it evolved when the first mouse came out of like the goo, whatever. And it is based on it's like our emotional, it's our social, it's our relationships. I very frequently tell my clients like, look, we're mammals. And so when we have ruptures at work, our work is directly related to our home. And if we're a mammal and we don't have a den, like that's going to go straight into your sense of safety. And it's the same thing with your family, like, or just like wanting to fit in. It's just like when people have these questions of, I don't know why this is bothering me so much. It's just like, I can tell you why it's bothering you so much, because that part of your brain feels reliant on safety. And for the mammal brain, especially humans, like we're meant to be pack animals, things like a den and a pack. Like if you think of the mammals that kicked out of the pack, they're not safe anymore. And so if you're excluded from your friends, if you're excluded from your family, that's going to trigger this, I'm not safe anymore. And then around that, like the other layer, excuse me, of the brain, it's our neocortex. It's the newest part of the brain. And this says it's the human brain, but I'm sure that other animals have neocortexes, I think. I don't really know. But I really like this. We kind of talks about this concept of like what language that we use. So like when I think of the other part, I really think about our frontal lobes. It's just like where analogy comes from. This is, sorry, just need to admit someone. Analysis comes from. This is where I think, and this is also the space of our bodies that we really identify as. Like I identify mostly as my thoughts, but that's because I was taught. I wasn't really never taught to identify as my body. But I love how it talks about the language. So like the language of the old, like the lizard part of the brain is sensation and impulses. The language of the limbic system and the mammal brain is emotion and feeling tones. I love this, that can be considered a language. And then the neofrontal cortex is the idea of language of thought and verbal expression. And so I'm gonna stop sharing my screen just for a second to see how's that landing? Does that make sense? Okay. And so when these, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, we do have a question in the chat.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I can't see the chat, but I mean, I can see it, but like my brain does see it. All right. I'm going to read that question. Thank you, Alice.
I can read it for you if you want.
Thank you,
Carla. So the question is from iPhone. I don't know who that is. You can actually change your name on your screen. Oh, from Saul. Perfect. Yeah. How would someone who has had trauma know that the trauma is cleared out of their bodies?
That is a really, really good question. And I would love to open that up to the panel. Also, I just wanted to name that the people who were named iPhone are Saul and Gina. So hello, Saul and Gina. So I'm going to mute for a second and just see if anyone would like to answer that. And if not, I'm happy to ramble for the next 10 minutes. And it's a really good question, Saul, so it might take us a minute.
I can start by saying something about it. I mean, I feel like the main way that we know is how we are responding to life, and the things that maybe normally triggered us, do they still trigger us? How much joy and peace are we feeling in our life? And it really, comes down to safety. How safe do we feel in our life? And so kind of like the other end of that, how do we heal from trauma, is safety. And that can come in many different ways, but it's bringing as much safety as we can into our bodies and our nervous systems and our lives. So that's what I have to say right off the top of my head about it.
Thank you, Christy Joy.
I'm happy to riff off what Christy said. I think one of the really important things to recognize, sort of referencing my previous point about perception being reality, is developing self-awareness. Because I think, to your point, Christy Joy, I think unless we have a certain level of self-awareness, we might not even recognize some of those sort of embodied feelings that we feel as a result of trauma. And the more embodied we become, the more self-aware we become, the easier it becomes to address some of that trauma moving forward in various different ways. I don't think there's a definitive, quantitative measure of how much trauma is stored in the body, but it is definitely a qualitative understanding of self-awareness and developing self-awareness through different, practices.
Thanks, Carla. I also, I realized that Saul's question actually goes really well into the concept of the window of tolerance, which was, I can tell like we're all like energy workers, because it's like, I don't know, it's like we're all just like one jumping, and it's amazing. It's like actually really cool. But Saul, would it be okay if we went on to discuss the window of tolerance and to see if that helps your understanding?
Yeah, sure. And thanks to all the people who answered.
Thank you. And also, so next we'll do window of tolerance, and then Mary put a statement in the chat too. And Mary, I can't see your face, but I'm hoping to come back to that after we do the window of tolerance, if that would be okay. Which I'm just gonna submit as well. So I'm gonna share my screen again. And Jonah, do you feel cool to do window of tolerance?
Yeah, I can pontificate about it for a little bit.
Okay. Sharing screen. I'll try to do it slow.
Okay, so yeah, I just want to like acquaint myself with the diagram. Okay, so the way that I understand the window of tolerance is it's like our capacity to be with an experience, right? And I think that capacity is always sort of changing depending on what's going on in the day, what's going on in a life, whether you've like eaten, gotten enough sleep, right? These are like food, water, sleep are things that can expand our window of tolerance, right? Like being in traffic, getting yelled at, like listening to screaming from anybody, right, can decrease our window of tolerance, right? And so in the window of tolerance, which you can see in the diagrams, is it's like, we can be in the ventral vagal, which is the social engagement, right? Which is feeling safe, feeling social, feeling connected, right? That's kind of like the sweet spot of where we want to be. If we start to get activated, we can go into the sympathetic, which is like the mobilized fight or flight response, right? Which, there's like energy that goes into the system. Blood goes to your arms and legs, getting you ready to either run or fight, right? And it moves away from the core of the system, right? Moves away from the belly. So like if you get activated after you've eaten, like your food isn't really digesting because the blood in your stomach that's like bringing energy there has moved into the arms and legs. And then if we get super activated, we can go into dorsal vagal shutdown, which is the reptilian brain that Emmy mentioned, which is sort of a collapse, right? And so what happens to me is like I will get really activated and then I will just shut down and I need to spend like 5 hours watching Law and Order or like NCIS or some like trash TV to like re-regulate my system, right? And I think like learning to expand the window of tolerance is like learning to, not just like deal with more, but like noticing like where we are in that window of tolerance, right? Noticing when we start to get activated, start to go into a shutdown response, or start to go into a fight or flight response, right? You might notice that like in the chest, right? Like breathing getting faster, heartbeat accelerating, right? And I think some of the practices that are helpful are learning how to like down regulate if we're going into that mobilized fight or flight, or up regulate if we like going into the freeze and collapse. And so I think like part of expanding this window of tolerance is noticing like, where am I in this, right? And also noticing like what our baseline is. And like where we are like going up or coming down from our baseline, and like how much we can really handle in a moment. And if like we're starting to get overactivated or moving into a shutdown, like recognizing, okay, I need to take a break, I need to step away, I need to set a boundary, I need to call somebody, I need to eat a snack, right? Any of these things can like help increase our capacity to be in the moment, or we might need to be like, I can't even be here right now, and take ourselves into some situation where we can resource ourselves. And then last thing that I'm going to say, coming back to, I think, Saul's question, is I think, part of the healing of the trauma is like learning to be like expand that window of tolerance, and situations that used to dysregulate us or like cause us to go into fight or flight or shutdown, like being able to have a capacity to be with that in a different way, that it's not as activating. And again, I think a lot of this is learning to notice where we are in that kind of window of tolerance, what's going on in the system, and learning to like really care for ourselves and each other, right? So that we can be present and also know when like, okay, I've had enough. And like, instead of like getting super activated, I can come back to a state of regulation. So I hope that was helpful.
Thanks, Jonah. That was amazing. I am going to stop sharing the screen. And I narrate what I do. And part of the reason why I narrate what I do is so that you know what's coming, because things can be very shocking, right? And I know for me, it might seem really simple, but if someone goes in and out of screen share, I get dysregulated very easily. And so I really appreciate that explanation, Jonah. Thank you so much. Saul, so my brain is like, I'm such a Gemini. I'm like, going in two different directions. Like one direction I would love to, no multitasking. I would love to do is maybe for all of us, panelists and audience, to take a few moments and think about what are some of our signs and symptoms that we are in our window of tolerance, that we are co-regulated or regulated, or when we're like outside of it. I know for me, when I'm outside of it, I get really spacey or really snappy. And so maybe just take like a minute or two and like think about, okay, well, what are some of the things that I do? Like, what are some of my signs? I'm gonna mute.
I would say for me, when I'm leaving my window of tolerance, I do like, we use the word activated, and it's kind of, that's a great depiction, because I do feel almost like a constriction and a heightened sense of energy, but not in an invigorated way, just sort of like I become a lot more alert, and I have less of a awareness of my environment, actually. I notice that. So that's one thing I notice when I'm activated.
Thanks for naming that, Erica. Does anyone else want to come off mute? I see Lisa's hand.
Can I ask a question? Hi, I'm Lisa. And the question I have around the window of tolerance is it something that is stagnant? Like this is what it is and this is where it will be? And what are the things, like I understand the awareness part, and I have my triggers, I fight, flight, procrastinate, sleep, run away. But I'm wondering, what I didn't hear is like, what are the things, what are types of activity, what are the things that we can do that are going to be able to widen that window or decrease the triggers? And is that something that can happen?
Yeah, definitely. And that's a really good question, Lisa. Thank you for asking it. The way I think I remember hearing Jonah say, like, even throughout the day, our window of tolerance can shrink or not shrink. And I'm thinking halt, right? Like hungry, angry, lonely, tired. That's going to shrink my window of tolerance. But also, like, is it high? Or did I have really dysregulated parents? Or, like, am I in a system that doesn't meet my needs? Or did I not have healthy co-regulators? Or am I in an unjust system, just period? And so those are things that are going to like shrink our window of tolerance too. But what I love is like what Peter Levine said is like that it's not a prognosis, right? Like it's just a description. And so some of the things that we're going to be doing today throughout the discussion are things you can do to increase your window of tolerance. So Carla's embodiment practice of bringing the heart to our like bringing our breath down to our heart, that's something that's going to expand our window of tolerance. So any kind of like embodiment practice, any kind of practice that involves like polyvagal theory, somatic practices, they're all going to expand that window of tolerance. And that doesn't mean that we're not going to have bad days. But I know for me, like I knew I was healing and getting better when I could leave my cell phone on. And I remember the day Carla called me and you're so direct. You're like, oh, I actually answered your phone. I'm like, I gotta leave my cell phone on. Like, so every was a win-win, like, but that was all for me a way that I knew I was like, things are starting to shift. And I still have a hard time parallel parking on a busy street, you know, like that's like, I don't know how long that's going to take for me to feel more embodied doing. I mean, I used to live in Chicago and I drove a pickup truck, right? Like I'm a driver, but I can't parallel park without having a pickup truck. But does anyone else, Lisa, does that feel like an okay answer? Yeah. Does anyone else want to name how they know when they're activated or how they know that things are getting better or talk about strategies? Anyone want to name anything? Agnes? Yeah.
So the subject is fascinating to me because a year ago I was diagnosed with dysautonomia, so complete dysregulation of the autonomic nervous system. And I feel like this is an intervention for me tonight. This is just so wonderful. It's funny because just today, to use the phrase, the window of tolerance, something happened today with somebody else who was completely off the rails about something, and rather than take that personally, like it was somehow my fault, I didn't take any ownership of it, and just said, well, first of all, look how far you've come on taking care of that issue. So if today wasn't the day to get over the goal line, then screw it. Maybe tomorrow is, maybe next week is. But in the past, I would have thought that's my problem to fix somehow. It's my responsibility to make this person feel better. And yet I just kind of sat here and said, well, let's just talk about this now. And they came back and said, thank you so very much, for talking me down from the ledge. So I don't, but here's my thing. I have no idea why that happened today. And as somebody who, a year ago was completely disengaged from their own body, had no sense of what was going on in their body, just none. It's still very difficult for me sometimes to recognize, is what I'm being triggered by worth that reaction or the response? Is this something that is this normal, for lack of a better word? Because I didn't know a year ago for the first 66 years of my life anything other than you just keep forging ahead, go forward, don't worry about what's going on. It doesn't make a difference. You're tired, you're hungry, you're depressed, you're this, just keep working. So in the last year, it's been quite an eye-opener to say, well, that was interesting that happened, but I don't have enough in my arsenal yet to say, this is where my window of tolerance is. This is where I'm inside, where I'm outside. It's almost like every day is an adventure. And every day I'm finding something new that says, no, that's okay. Don't worry about that. Or something that says, you might want to think about that a little bit more. Because now when I do feel something in my body, now it bothers me. Where I didn't feel my heart racing before. Now if there's a twinge, it's like, oh, which brings on anxiety, which I thought, well, that's interesting because I didn't think I had anxiety before, but you get better and now you have something new coming on. So the window of tolerance I find fascinating, but I don't know, I still don't have enough of a track record of working on myself and in my body to say, these are the markers that I can use to say, this will keep me within my window, or this will expand my window. Does that make sense? Am I explaining myself?
Definitely. I really want to say thank you for sharing that. I think we live in a culture where we're supposed to hide what we experience. And I think another really important reason just for the people who are here is it's like, this is my truth and this is what I'm experiencing. And it's so weird. Like, we are not programmed to realize we have bodies and to realize we have a relationship with our body, and working hard, even being in a school system where you have to sit at a desk and you have to raise your hand and you have to ask to pee, you have to ask to eat, or like growing up in a family where like meals were regulated at a certain time. And it takes us away of like the way our physical body is meant to be. And it's a tragedy and it's unjust and it creates the separation. And I would encourage you and all of us to think it's not necessarily about staying at all times within my window of tolerance. It's also about being very gentle with ourselves and being like, oh, I popped out, you know, like, whoopsie, you know, like, and sometimes like you find like a silly way of like being like, oh, bananas, you know, like I need to do some tapping, or, you know, I'm going to focus on my breathing for a minute. Cause it's really like, we're not statues, and we're gonna ebb and flow. This, like, if you think about your body, like you're digesting food and there's like a war of bacteria, you know, like going on in your intestines, and like we're this giant microcosm, and it's always changing, and our environment is always changing. The stars are always changing. The people around us are always changing. And so like, it's okay, you know, to not be like, I don't know where my window is. Girl, I don't know where my window is either, right? Like, it was out the window today. I literally texted the admin, I want to jump out a window, because she asked me for some videos that took me 5 minutes to make. And I was like, oh, so I hope that helps. And I also see Daniela's hand, and I would love to honor that hand, if that's okay, Agnes. Yeah, okay, right. Go ahead, Daniela.
I think that all that you guys are talking, at first, I'm really honored to be here. A lot of nice people. I'm so glad that you guys invited me. But I think also the techniques are important, but the cope mechanism that we come, like getting in life, you know, maybe you were born with a hammer, and with a hammer you can do just what a hammer does, and then you acquire a Phillips, and then a Allen, and then a screwdriver, and then that makes your window of tolerance a little bit better. The way that you cope with things, it gives you like more tools to deal with things in life, because the trauma is just what you said. It's not the thing sees, how you react to that thing. So self-awareness is really important. You look to yourself and you like, yes, for me, I notice when I'm out of my balance, I'm totally irritated. So anything takes me out. And other days I'm like, the world can come down in my head. I'm like, yeah, okay, yeah, it's fine, you know? So I think that cope mechanisms is really important, to be aware. What are you using? What is useful for you, and the ones that you don't need anymore. So you just keep it away.
Thanks, Daniela. And since we are, part of the goal of tonight is to kind of like pepper some tools and mechanisms in throughout the conversation, which is feeling very rich. I just want to name that. I was wondering if Jonah, would you be willing to do the 5-4, the thing with the thing?
Yeah, certainly. And also, since I got the mic, I just wanted to touch on this like window of tolerance thing again real quick. Like when we showed that graphic, it made it seem like the window of tolerance was like at like the static place, right? And that's just a graphic, right? That's like very different in like a human nervous system. And I also think that part of the way that we expanded is like being on the edges, right? Like noticing when we come to activation and being like, okay, I'm going to use one of these tools like Daniela mentioned, right? And come back into this state of regulation, come back into a state of safety. And I think like being able to do that and see like, oh, whoa, like that thing happened and I didn't freak out like I usually freaked out. I made a different choice. I came back into regulation. Wow, that really worked. And then in the future, when we come into like that state again, realizing like, oh, like I've already gone through this and like it worked out, right? And remember that one time that like, I came back into regulation, wasn't that cool, right? And then other times it's like, actually, nope, my day is done. I'm getting into bed, I'm watching TV, like I'm closing the windows, like I can't deal with this, right? And then we try again, we get to like begin again each day, each time. But I'm going to show you a tool that I really like to help with the kind of like regulation of the system. And when I'm like dysregulated, when I'm disassociating, when I'm like having a really difficult time, this is a very easy tool to come back into the body and to come back into awareness. And it's 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And so what we're going to start with is just 5 things that you can see. All right. And so just looking around your space, noticing 5 things that you can see. All right.
I'm at the center and all I see are butterflies.
Yeah, and like things that are pleasurable to sort of have your eyes rest on, right? Maybe noticing the color, noticing the shape, right? Maybe even looking behind you, right? Because that can bring in safety, is noticing like what's behind us in the space and that we're safe here. And then once you got your 5 things, and I don't want to rush anybody, we're going to do 4 things that you can touch, 4 things that you can feel, right? I'm just noticing the different textures or temperatures, right? And different shape. And if you're in like a public place, like say the city bus, right? You can maybe like touch the things in front of you, but also your clothing, right? Like maybe your pants have a different feel than like, you know, I'm wearing all denim, so it all feels the same, right? Maybe like my hands feel different than my pants, right? Or your hair, yeah. And then we're gonna go to 3 things you can hear, right? And so one of them might be my voice. So that's an easy one. I'm just noticing the sounds that are close or far away. Right. Now, 2 things that you can smell. Right. And if you're on public transportation, right, the inside of your elbow will smell different than the back of your hand. Right. So that's like a really easy way of doing that one, right? Especially if you're in public and you can't like pick up like this thing. And then 1 thing that you can taste, right? And maybe just allow yourself to savor that. And again, if you don't have a drink or anything like that, you know, you can just like the inside of your mouth, right? Lick the back of your hand if you want to, right? You can get creative with this. And so what this does, right, if we're in a dysregulated state, it brings us into our senses and the sensory information that helps to like get rid of the story of like whatever's happening, and it helps to like bring us back into the body and kind of like regulate the nervous system into like what's actually happening right now, right? And it can bring in a sense of safety, right?
Can I piggyback off of like why that with trauma, with a dysregulated nervous system, when we get activated into that space, like it's a memory that has gotten stuck in our short-term memory. And so we tend to relive it. And in that space, we're not able to, like physiologically, our brains cannot take in new information. And so going through this process of almost like forcing, I don't want to say force because like force is the opposite of embodiment, but encouraging, inviting your body to notice things that are new, that are different. It takes you out of that physiological response that your mind and your brain and your body are going through, and it brings you into this space of, I can take in new information. I am not where I was when that happened. I am aware that something is happening and that it is different. And so it allows for this space, like the spaciousness of, this is different, I'm different, this is new, and new is okay. And so I hope that's okay to add to that, but it just kind of like popped in my head.
Yeah, definitely, thank you.
And I would really like to say that when you said you wanted to do that exercise, I was like, oh, okay. Like I usually don't like those exercises, but the way that you talked us through it and the pacing of it, I felt myself coming in, and that felt really good. So thank you. I was hoping to move on. Does that feel okay? Yeah, okay. And I really do want to honor that Mary has this amazing, so Mary is a midwife, and she put a comment in the chat when we were talking about trauma. It says, when the primitive brain is traumatized and not addressed, that birthing vaginally without added trauma is very difficult. The ability for the brain and body to be connected is limited. And when I gave birth to my first child, the labor was really short, but I didn't know to make this connection until Mary named it. Just right now, I had a lot of unprocessed trauma coming up to that, and my birth was fine. Everything was fine, but it was not good. It didn't feel good. And so it's like even sitting here right now and being able to have that awareness, I am deeply appreciating. So thank you for naming that, Mary. Christy Joy, I was hoping to move into the autonomic nervous system stuff. Would that be okay? I have a slide of, it's like the green, yellow, red, or blue slide that I'll just show it and you can tell me if it feels okay. Is that okay?
Sure. Yeah, I'll see what else I can add. I think Jonah addressed some of that already with the social engagement.
I'm gonna share screen.
Okay.
And we'll just see what happens, I guess.
Sounds good. Okay, yeah, so I'll just kind of talk about this a little more. I think what we were all originally taught about how our autonomic nervous system worked was that there was rest and digest and fight flight. That was really the common understanding. And then about 30 years ago, Dr. Stephen Porges kind of put out this new theory called the polyvagal theory that shows us it's a little more complicated than that. And really, the new piece of it is the vagus nerve, which plays a big role in the autonomic nervous system, actually has two separate parts that do very different things. And the two parts are the ventral vagus and the dorsal vagus. And I'm not going to get into the anatomy of that right now, but the ventral vagus, or the social engagement system, is unique to mammals. So not all, creatures have this. And that is our place of feeling safe and connected and at peace and very present and aware. And then if we are met with any sort of challenge, we actually first use social engagement, right? We try to connect with people. We look at people's faces. This whole thing is kind of going on unconsciously. We're reading people. And if a smile, or if we feel like somebody isn't safe or the situation isn't safe in some way, then we'll move into the sympathetic or the fight flight. And this is all automatic. And I think that's really important, especially when we're dealing with trauma, because part of what's really common for people that have had traumatic experiences is self-judgment and self-blame for how they responded. And this is a completely involuntary process, and that's really important to understand. We think of this idea of animals playing dead when they're caught by a predator. They're not playing. Their nervous system has taken over and made that choice for them. There's no conscious choice to it. And we have the same thing and there's a spectrum of how much these systems are activated. It's not always so extreme that that we faint or go unconscious, but we can. But there's just, there's degrees of it. So next we go to the fight flight, right? And that's either we put our fists up in some way or we hightail it out of there. And again, that choice is made by our nervous system. We don't choose that. It's assessing things so quickly and deciding, can I fight this or not? And if that is too much, if we're like, yeah, we can't do either, we can't get away fast enough, we can't fight off this perceived danger. So a lot of it for us as humans is perceived danger. Sometimes it's real danger, but sometimes it's just what we perceive. Then we go into the shutdown, freeze, or the dorsal vagus. And that's where everything just kind of collapses. That's that feeling of overwhelm. That's a lot of times where procrastination comes from, where you just want to pull the covers up over your head and not even deal with anything in life. So, but one thing I do want to say about this, just to kind of give the context of this system, it's not all bad. It's not like fight, flight, and freeze or sympathetic and dorsal are bad and we don't ever want to be there. The problem only comes in. So first of all, it's useful, right? Like if we need to get away from something, it's very useful, but it also has another use. Sympathetic energy is what gives us the energy to do something. It is probably what most of us on the panel probably felt before we got on this call, right? We're having a little bit of, activation, and that's a good thing. That helps us get prepared. That gives us alertness and energy. And then the dorsal vagus has its place too, in that it allows us to be immobilized. It's what allows us to be still in meditation. It's what allows us to be close and intimate with somebody. So they all have their role. The only problem comes in, and it's usually caused by either trauma or not having co-regulators or healthy co-regulators growing up. And I think somebody mentioned that. That's the only problem. Then we get to where we're stuck in usually one of these states a lot of the time, and we're not able to come out of it. So that's what we are looking for, is this ability to move with ease in appropriate response to what is happening. So that is nervous system regulation. It's not always being in social engagement, because that's not always appropriate for what's going on. So was there anything else you wanted me to touch on with that?
I love that, Christy. I'm going to stop sharing. And just, this is me dumping a bunch of images on like Prettified into a Google Doc, and we will be providing a Prettified document for everyone who signed up. So I'm going to stop screen sharing. And yeah, that's just so powerful to hear, I think. And I hope it's okay to add this, that like our senses come to our, do you feel comfortable to talk about like the amygdala and the 7-second delay? Does that, because it feels like it goes really well with what you were just saying, and I'm also happy to name it.
No, you can go ahead.
Okay, so with like what Christy Joy was saying, this is a physiological response, and I love the idea of the appropriate response. I haven't heard it named like that, and that just feels really powerful to me to hear. So I really appreciate that addition to this conversation. There's like these tiny, tiny little things in your brain called amygdala, and they're like smoke detectors. All of our sensory information goes to that part of our brain first, right? So touch, smell, taste, even like a memory, like it goes to the amygdala first. And the amygdala has this job: safe, not safe. And if it's safe, it goes to our frontal lobes, to our neocortex, like it's allowed to move forward. If it's considered not safe, and we are completely powerless in that moment to have expanded what it thinks is safe or not safe. In this moment, when we're co-regulated, we can work on what our amygdala thinks is safe and not safe. It's not like it's just like this rogue two little muscles that are like wreaking havoc in our brain. Like there are definitely ways of working with your amygdala, and the things we're doing right now, like even just like taking a second to rock and touch your arms or your face, or remembering that you have feet, like that's going to help your amygdala not be like a crazy fire alarm. But if those amygdalas say not safe, it sends it to your autonomic nervous system. It sends it to fight, flight, freeze. It's just like, and after it decided to send it this way, you have 7 seconds, right? That was about 7, what I think are seconds, before that information is allowed to the frontal lobe. So we are either immobilizing or mobilizing. Sorry, we are either mobilizing or immobilizing before our logic part comes on. And so if you're like, why am I yelling? Why am I running? Why am I hitting this person? Why am I fainting? It's because like our neocortex, our frontal lobes, didn't get the information. 7 whole seconds. And then by that time, an entire mechanism that is geared towards your safety, towards keeping you alive, has come online, regardless of what the threat is. Your nervous system doesn't care. It doesn't know the difference between a war zone and misattuned caregivers. It doesn't know the difference. It just knows safe, not safe. And so it's like safe frontal lobes, not safe, automatic response. So that thing, yeah, how's that landing? Does anyone have anyone from anywhere that they want to add, or questions, or dance moves apparently? Yeah, Jonah, go ahead.
That makes me think about the negativity bias that our brain has, right? So like we see a situation and it's like, oh, that looks dangerous, right? Because like that keeps us alive, right? Like in the prehistoric, human development, you're like, oh, I see a tiger by a watering hole, like that watering hole is unsafe, never going back there again. Right? If you go and have like a great time at the watering hole, like 100 other times, like that doesn't stay in there because like, who cares? That doesn't keep you alive, right? And our brains sort of develop to have this negativity bias. So if like we sense a threat, it's like, okay, this thing all bad, right? And it takes like really sitting with a positive experience to allow that to sink in. Right?
Thanks, Jonah. Carla, I saw your hand.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to say something similar actually to what Jonah was saying, and speak to the RAS, or the reticular activation system, and also sort of reference something that AJ Agnes had said earlier. Forget exactly how she'd phrased it, but this sort of idea of like, well, how do we know like kind of where we're at in terms of the window of tolerance? And I think a big part of this is really the more we interrupt the pattern, and this is sort of the hypnosis training talking, but the more we can, I dropped a video in the chat that I would love for all of you to watch. If you're not familiar with Melissa Tiers, definitely check her out because she's amazing. And it speaks to this idea of memory reconsolidation, because what keeps us stuck is not necessarily the conscious thought of what we're thinking, but the emotion that's attached to that thought. So I also said, feelings are not facts. So as we start to recognize and sort of create this distinction and the separation between, these repetitive thoughts that we might think, and sort of attaching a different emotion to some of those thoughts, that's how we start to incrementally change our behaviors and patterns moving forward.
And, it just struck a chord with me, because earlier when I said, I have no idea why in that moment, I don't know what happened or what tool I leaned on, but I realize now, I thought this person was so out of control, and I thought, I have enough. Like, I'm not taking on, no. Like danger, Will Robinson, no. I can't take on anything else right now. And that's what I recognize just in this conversation. But if that's all it took, I'll take it. That's a winning tool for me. So I'm going to just put that in the win column and just say, noticing how other people are responding and or reacting, and whether that feels good or bad to me. It's like, no, I didn't want that.
Yeah.
That was amazing to get that recognition.
Yeah. And like when we grow up with misattuned caregivers, we're not taught how to pay attention to our feelings, because our misattuned caregivers are saying one thing, but energetically we're sensing something different from them. And so we grow up in these schisms, and even with like capitalism and white supremacy culture, it's like a schism. It's like, this is what I'm saying, but this is what, I literally remember my parents spanking me and being like, I'm doing this for your own good, And I remember being like 5 and being like, what? Like that makes no sense. Or being threatened to be sent to bed without dinner. Like as a mammal, that's going to activate my primitive brain because it is a physiological need for me to eat. So not safe, right? Safe, not safe, but learning to listen to yourself, and also like learning to come into these spaces of like, oh, look, I felt my breath, like I listened to the air in my nose, or I saw myself when I was brushing my teeth. So even like coming into these really simple spaces of, I am noticing the things that I do. I am noticing my body. I am praising myself. I am aware. I am, like your brain doesn't know the difference between the big stuff and the little stuff, So it's just going to be like, so just like coming into the space of like, I'm noticing. And so, yes, Carla.
I just want to draw attention to, it was so fun. I kind of know Agnes fairly well at this point, but just observing her embodied cognition when she said, okay, I'm putting a check mark in the winning column or the winning category. That was a really beautiful example of this recategorization of, you could literally see her brain sort of reformulating or recategorizing this idea. And I hope this is okay to say here, Agnes, but this reminds me a little bit of our conversation about the burning house. I don't know if you want to say anything about that, but I couldn't help but think about that.
I just wanted to add something to what you were just saying, Emmy, about noticing, I just noticed my breath. I just, kind of acknowledging that. And, we can also support that kind of embodiment and sense of safety by, I think Irene Lyons talks about this. She does a lot with nervous systems and honoring your body's impulses. So, how I think Agnes was wording it so well, like I was just taught to just keep going. Doesn't matter if I'm tired or hungry or cold or whatever. And I think that's true for a lot of us. And so honoring those impulses, when you're cold, get a blanket, right? Or if you're hungry, eat something. If you're thirsty. So, and as you do that, those signals are going to become stronger. And it's also telling your nervous system that somebody's paying attention. Somebody's paying attention to this body, and that increases your sense of safety as well. So it kind of does two things.
Thank you for adding to that, Christy Joy, so much. Thank you. I feel like this is leaning into a pivot in topics, but it feels like it's kind of like veering that way. And so there were two main, like I had a bunch of sub questions, but I totally have ulterior motives because I have questions I want answered. But like one of the questions, so I think the first question is, as practitioners, and even as people who utilize practitioners, like, what does it mean to be a trauma-informed practitioner? I have heard so many frustrated people when they talk about their therapist being like, she told me I didn't know myself. And it's like, maybe you don't know yourself because you started having children at age 16, and like, then your access to the privilege of knowing yourself was, you were never taught, or this idea of like, it's like, people commenting on like, oh, well, you're a resistant client. And it's like, and so for me, it's just like the idea of like, well, what does it mean to be trauma informed? And for me, where I've come to is that like, everything everyone does is based on their sense of safety. And so if I am having sex with multiple partners in harmful ways, not that having sex with multiple partners is bad, but like if I am doing anything that feels like self-harm or potentially dangerous, any kind of an addiction, any kind of behavior, eating, whatever, so it's because my nervous system is trying to keep me safe. It's trying to keep me alive. And so that's helped me so much as a practitioner to really fully believe that anything that my clients do, or anything that my friends do, or anything that I do, or my kids do, that like I might be annoyed by, or, it's this idea that like, that is their nervous system trying to keep them safe. And that is a part of them that is doing its best to keep that whole system safe. And so for me, that's where I've kind of come to be at with like trauma-informed practitioner is like this whole sense of faith that it's really about the safety. And so if anyone, panel audience wants to name what that might feel like, or I'm gonna mute. Lisa.
I've had an interesting journey over the last 7 years. And it started out with doing some work, but I didn't even know that there was trauma in my life. I had no idea that what happened in my younger life was actually trauma. It was all played down. And I started doing work with, I spent 2 years with a shaman. I did body psychotherapy and multiple modalities in that. I got Reiki certified. I met Emmy along the way. I worked with a spiritual healer. I've been doing all this, but what I found is I also had a therapist along the way. And the therapist is open to all the things that I'm doing. And I think for me, what I get it's been this combination piece of what I get from her is somebody that knows me from start to finish. And so when I'm in that place where I'm not thinking I'm progressing, or I'm not thinking I've made big changes in my life, she's been with me for the last four years, and she's like, get out of here. I need the whole slap on the head. And what I'm finding is I was just on a phone call with a friend of mine today who was just experiencing all kinds of crap, and it was all trauma coming up. And she has a therapist that's doing trauma work, but it's not moving fast enough, and she's not getting what she feels she needs. And it was fascinating as we were talking, because I want to hook her up with you, Emmy. But what I've recognized is that there's anything that's helping me work through the pieces. Part of mine was grief. That's what I worked on with the shaman. It was working on letting those things come out of the physical part of my body. And I'm kind of laughing now. We're down to my knees and my ankles now, Emmy. So well done. But yeah, it's like this progressive thing. And so it's what I'm throwing out there too is, how do we get the word out? Because nobody's necessarily certified, but I got to tell you, I'm way more safe and comfortable doing some of that trauma work with Emmy than I would be with a therapist who, one, doesn't understand it. I think having somebody who understands trauma is a really big addition and a comfort level. And I don't know. I just started to talk and then I couldn't stop. So
it was very helpful. What you added is that someone who meets you where you're at. And it reminded me of, I was already a swim instructor, but I, had this swim instructor skills from white Midwesterners. So it was like, you will do this like this, anytime anyone ever responded to my style, they're like, she's firm but kind, but and then I was in Miami and I was working with someone who was a lot softer, and he said this word, he would say it to the children. He's like, I'll hold your hand until you let go of mine. He's like, you push me away. And I was like, so profound. It's like, we meet each other where we're at. I'll hold your hand until you let it go. So thank you, Lisa. I really appreciate that share. And I think for getting the word out, people have been doing this research for Freud actually discovered a direct correlation between mental health in women and sexual abuse. But because the women who were being treated were socialites, that meant their fathers were sexually abusing them. And so Freud was pressured to retract his statements. And that's when he started doing cocaine and saying that women, wanted, he was, I think spiritually he was, I don't know, because I haven't read after that, but I believe that spiritually he was very traumatized from that, but he still went with it, you know. But I think that there was a huge schism. But like, so since 1895 at least, we have known that there is a direct correlation with these things. And Peter Levine started his stuff in 1965. So it's not that the information isn't out there. It's like, there's so much information out there, but in order to work it, you have to work yourself. And so I think that that's also where, like, learning to be trauma informed in yourself and as a practitioner, as a parent, as a human, as a friend, as a lover, you have to develop the capacity to look at yourself. And it is, I'm gonna make this cry. It is not easy. I spent a year like crying when I was working my fourth step, you know, like I was a mess. And not everyone has that privilege. And I don't know why some people have the capacity to look at themselves and some don't. But then that's where I think being trauma aware comes in. It's like, maybe, you know, like maybe they'll commit suicide, you know, who knows? I don't know what someone's resourcing is. And so I don't know why it's like this, like, my professor told me, when I was TAing for her, and she's like, college is like a shower and students are like in raincoats, you know? I feel like that with trauma-informed practices. It's like, there's like this shower and like a lot of people are like, oh, you know? So it's hard. And to me, it's devastating. And when we read that quote by Peter Levine, I believe it's true. I believe it's true that our ability to survive as a species depends on how and if we heal. So that's me. And if anyone else would like to talk about what it means to be a trauma-informed practitioner or any response, I would love to open it up.
Happy to go, but I kind of want to step back for other people if there's anybody else that wants to say something. But I guess I want to address it from both perspectives. I think, you know, being on the receiving end or having experienced trauma, I think that willingness to do the work and to really invest in a growth mindset and to work on personal growth, because I think, unfortunately, the narrative really needs to change in society about the way that mental health practitioners or therapists or counselors go into the field. I think I see it all too often that people that go into that work are actually using it as a way of escaping their own trauma. You know, it's almost like a procrastination mechanism that they're using, unfortunately. And, you know, maybe partially that's because of lack of resources or lack of awareness. Like, I don't fully, you know, pretend to understand that. But on the practitioner side of things, and what I'm going to say might be a little bit controversial, and some people on this panel might disagree with me, but I also think it's really important to hold our clients accountable. And to really straddle that really fine line about, yes, you know, holding hands and being supportive and meeting people where they are, but also kind of pushing them out of their comfort zone gently. You know, I think that's something that's really, really important. I mean, it just makes me think. I had a woman in my office today who I worked with her years ago, and she came back today, and she, you know, she was almost like trying to guide the conversation in the direction that she wanted to take the conversation in. And I kind of jokingly, might have come across a little bit asshole-ish, but kind of jokingly said to her, I was like, yeah, no, we're not doing that story today. Like, we're going, and I literally went, we're going this way. And it was related to teenage trauma. And I could tell she was so resistant. She didn't want to deal with it. She wanted to go back into being that 17-year-old trapped in her mother's stinky apartment. I said, no, you don't get to be that role today. She's actually a teacher. And I said, today you're going to be the teacher. You've told me several times how incredibly resourceful you are and how good you are at helping your students. And I want you to be this version of yourself. Anyway, long story short, we did sort of some inner child work and took her back to her 17-year-old self. But it was so interesting because even a few years ago, it would have made me feel uncomfortable because I would have got wrapped up into her story and been like, oh my God, no, I can't make her like cry and make her feel uncomfortable about, doing it my way, or quote unquote, my way. But I've done enough work to know what works. And I think that is something that, as sort of ethical, trauma-informed practitioners is so incredibly important. Unless we do the work and unless we both cognitively, consciously understand the theory and the concepts behind the work that we're doing, but also qualitatively doing the art of the work. Like I see it with a lot of my students, like, I'm sure you know who I'm talking about, Emmy, but like there's a few students that are like, I need more books and I need more videos and I need, to kind of like study more. We were just having this conversation the other day. And really what it's about is actually practicing and doing the work and understanding the art of the work, both in terms of being a practitioner, but also being on the receiving end. And I think that's why, a lot of practitioners make the mistake of playing the role of the practitioner and sometimes forgetting about the fact that they need to keep being the client. They need to keep being on the receiving end as well. I almost wish that there was, in most organizations, whether it's hypnosis or clinical psychology or counseling or whatever it might be, that sort of part of continuing education was really specific about getting some kind of therapy or some kind of healing, because I don't think that that's something that really exists per se that I'm aware of. Anyway, that's my 2 cents. So.
Thanks, Carla. I appreciate it. It reminded me of like the and, right? The both and space of you're doing the best that you can and I'm going to meet you right here. And, I'm going to lay this out, right? Like I had a client that I love and was terrified to say this to him, but he was describing something to me where he was using textbook abusive language towards his girlfriend. And I like almost peed myself, but I was like, I'm not calling you abusive. However, I want you to know that on paper, that language would be considered verbal abuse. And I wanted to puke, but like, I just was like, if he chooses to never see me again as a client, that's fine. But that's something that I think he would want to know. Right. So I think that it's like, sometimes we have to lay this path out of, and I see Daniela's hand.
I don't know here in the United States, but I'm graduating psychology and have master's degree in psychosomatic and psychoneuroimmunology. And for you to graduate in psychology, you have to do therapy at least 3 years. You have to be responsible and have supervision and therapy. That's something that you have to do like for independent what you want to do, if it's hypnosis, if it's I have done a lot of things because I think that's how you come to be a good health care. If you know yourself and you know what's the points where it gets you, and to have empathy and to have like even be ethic, to respect that person that's coming to you and acknowledge and see her and really see her and listen her, not just be there. You have to have self-awareness and always be growing and learning and trying to be a better version of yourself. But I don't know here.
Thank you, Daniela. That's amazing. And the answer is no, you don't have to. Jonah, do you have any requirements?
For my program, I have to be in therapy. I had to take a certain amount of therapy, but that's unique. Most programs you don't. And also, I wonder if that has something to do with the abysmal state of healthcare in America, right? Because like straight up, it's a privilege to be able to go to therapy, right? If you don't have health insurance, if you have to pay for that out of pocket. And this is like the first time in my life that I've had health insurance and have been able to go to actual therapy. And, I've usually like sought out like energy workers, like coaches, astrologers, tarot readings, because those were like modalities that felt accessible to me. And like trying to get a therapist, I was like, there's no, like, I don't know how to do this. And it's only because I'm in a mental health counseling program that I know what to ask for, what to look for, what modalities I'm interested in, what questions to ask my therapist when I was interviewing them, because there's like a power dynamic where it's like the therapist and then the client. Which like it's not supposed to be that way in my opinion, and like that was very challenging, you know. And it's only because I have like this education and like this privileged body that I was able to be like, no, like these are the questions that I'm asking, and like you're working for me, right?
Yeah Alice.
I just am thinking about consent, and I think that that's like a big part of what helps me to feel safe with a practitioner. I worked with this woman, and, you know, she would say to me, like, I know you're talking about this right now, but there's part of me that wants to go over here. Would it be okay if we went over here? And for me, that was really helpful to have the sense that we were working together in that kind of way. And that I ultimately, like, I had the choice to say yes or no in that situation. So I guess that came up for me around feeling safe in a kind of environment. And then I guess also I'm just thinking, like, and I think we touched on this, but just that there's a lot of different definitions of trauma out there, and it doesn't seem to be kind of it doesn't seem to be just one. There's, you know, that there are practitioners that I've experienced who feel like trauma is really only like a war situation for people, and so I feel like there's, although it's been around for a while, that this more layered understanding about it, I don't think it's reaching everywhere, or it depends on the practitioner really being interested in it and seeking out that information.
Thanks, Alice. I think that it's the concept of consent. I love, and I really appreciate you naming that. And while you were saying the last thing, it's like, oh yeah, I forgot. It's actually a trauma response to not be able to let in new information. And so at some point in time when our sympathetic nervous system is activated, when we're in that fight-flight model, we're actually like, there's like this idea of like, my way is the only way. And so when we come into this space, it's because we're activated, it's because we're dysregulated. And when I saw that if you're in fight flight, my way is the only way, I remember thinking I was raised by parents who were chronically in that state. And so coming back full circle to this idea of like, why isn't there more? It is a crisis, you know, like mental health is a crisis. It's a crisis. And we just living in the West, like they've done studies where just living in the US is enough to constantly be in a mild activated sympathetic nervous system response. Just living here, not having our needs met, not having co-regulation, not having community, not having, you know, like all of these unmet needs. And so when kind of like linking that back to why don't people do this more, it's a trauma response. They literally can't let in more information. Yes, Agnes.
This is so fascinating because I'm 67, so I'm the oldest person in the room. And I should get an award or something for that. I don't know. But when I was growing up, and I survived incest until I was age 12. Nobody talked about it. Nobody did anything about it. And that was considered, well, you don't need mental health, because if you need mental health, then you're crazy. And there can be no other reason to get mental health other than you have some diagnosed psychological core issue that is a detriment to all of society. It wasn't for the sake of dealing with whatever you were dealing with. So of course, decades went past before I ever addressed it with a therapist. And then it was, well, you know, I just got divorced. I'm wondering why. I want to have a better version of myself in case there's another relationship on the horizon. And, I'm in corporate America and I got a really heavy responsibility, and I survived incest, and it was just another thing to check off. And now I sit here and I can hear myself saying to clients occasionally, I hope you grow bored with your story. I hope you have the appropriate outlet for it, but I hope you get bored with the old story and write a new one moving on out, because I can't want it for you. So at some point, Carla, when you were saying, we're not going to talk about that story, it was so impactful because, what good does it do? To have that old story, if that's not the story you want to stay with. And at some point you have to, for your own safety, your own mental health, your own ability to find your place in the world, write a new story. I just thought that was so impactful about, we're not going to talk that story too.
Thanks, Agnes. I really appreciate that. I want to name that it's 9:58, and we're meant to end at 10, and I'd like to respect that. Probably people do need to end at 10. This has been so rich. The one question I really wanted to get to, we didn't get to, and that's like all the BS around energy medicine, like you choose your life, it's like how do you tell that to someone who's really struggling, that's okay. I just want to stretch really quick and encourage you to remember that you have a body, and Eric, I'm sorry, you're gonna get to the orienting practice, but it's so helpful to gently and slowly look behind you, because one, you're showing your nervous system that there's no bear, and two, you're actually activating these nerves in your body that need to be also shown that they can move slowly. So it's just been such a pleasure. And if anyone wants to say anything in closing, I will try to put some stuff in the documents with more exercises, more resources. All of the panelists' contact information will be in the document. This has been such a rich, lovely discussion. I want to thank everyone, and I'm going to mute to see if anyone else would like to say or offer anything.
I just want to say thank you very much, Emmy. This was really, really fantastic.
Yeah, I just want to echo Carla and saying how much I appreciate to be a part of this and to be in community, because it's kind of a co-regulating experience, right? To come together and talk about trauma and learn about it. And I've even learned some things tonight. So thank you for everyone here.
Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. I just want to respond to, who was it that asked the question? Somebody asked about how to donate. I'm going to drop that link in the chat. We probably should have actually said that at the beginning. But this evening is, and please, only do this on a basis that you feel comfortable with, but we are looking to raise funds for Parmenter Foundation, which is an absolutely incredible foundation based in Wayland, Massachusetts. Their focus is working on bereavement and offering bereavement grief support and services within the community. And they do incredible work. So I'm going to just drop that link. If you'd like to donate, please donate directly through the link. And if you could reference in the notes section, just say that, it was based on this charity-based discussion that we're having, that would be helpful. I'm just going to grab the link for everyone. Sorry, my kids are going nuts in the background. I don't know why they're not in bed yet. Sorry, Joanna, go ahead.
I just wanted to say happy birthday to Emmy, because I know it's your birthday tomorrow.
Happy birthday!
Sorry for putting you on the loud, but I don't know. It's important to celebrate, the fact that you're here and you made it around another cycle around the sun.
Absolutely. I knew you were an air sign, Emmy.
How could I not be? Thank you, Jonah. I appreciate it. Thanks. It is my honor to be here with you guys. My birthday is tomorrow, and I'm super excited. Thanks. I'd actually forgotten.
That's what you get for having an astrologer on your panel.
So Amy. That's so Amy.
Thanks, everyone. There's some stuff rolling in the chat. Just lots of thank yous. There's a donation link. So thank you, right? Like, we are a collective nervous system right now. We are co-regulating, and even by coming together like this, we are providing healing. So as we heal the, like, you know, not on purpose, like in like a weird like control way, but as we heal, the people around us heal as well, because it has its own frequency. And so thank you for being a part of collective healing. So does it feel okay to close and say goodbye? Yeah.